this morning on our table sharing, our Come to the Table series, and we're looking at the famous passage of Mary and Martha. Now, I grew up with this passage, but I don't always know if it was a very positive message that I felt like I grew up with. It was be a Mary, not a Martha. Being practical is not spiritual. It was kind of the message that I grew up with this passage. And I just want to say this is not what this passage is about. So we can leave our fears at the door of this passage this morning. I want to tell you a little story about me and our girls. So everything that I do is pretty much for my girls. I live and breathe my girls. I didn't realize how much you could love someone until I became a mum. And I try to be a present mum, present and available to my children, sometimes at too great a cost, but I try to be present and available. This new year, we were talking about New Year's resolutions with our children, and I had an ask of them. And I wanted to ask them, and I did. I asked them, can you do two things for me this year, girls? Can you please help more around the house? And can you do better listening to me? And yes, Mummy, we'll try our hardest. And I thought, great. And I thought, well, I should really ask them in return what they want from me. And so I said, girls, in return, what would you like from me this coming year? And they replied, play more with us. Oh, if that's going to hit you like a ton of bricks. Inside, I am protesting inside. Everything I do for you. I spend all my time with you, crafting, creating, taking you places. What else do you want from me? Of course, I didn't say that, but inside, I'm screaming inside. You want me to, I already play with you. And now I could argue to my heart's content, but regardless, I had to admit this is their version. This is their version. I can spend my whole parenting life doing things for them, but if I don't do things with them, I have completely missed the point of being a present parent. Now, my girls absolutely love to play Minecraft. I have become a Minecraft mum. This is Ella's t-shirt, by the way. So I downloaded Minecraft onto my phone at a cost of $6.99, and we now have Minecraft time in our house as a family. Ella's dream came true last week when all four of us were sitting on the sofa playing Minecraft together. I'm terrible at it. I really am absolutely appalling at playing Minecraft. I don't know where to begin. Anyway, I'm being a present parent. But this passage is all about worship. It's about Jesus. This passage is all about being present. It's not a personality test. Are you a Mary or are you a Martha? It's not putting down of one and praising the other. This passage is all about learning what is important, what is most important. It's about worship. It's about Jesus breaking even more cultural norms, rightly placing service and ministry in their proper place, about prioritizing being in his presence above all else. So if we have our passage up, I'm actually reading from the NASB this morning, which is the New American Standard Bible, because I liked the way that it said it. Verse 38 to 42. In Luke 10. Now, as they were traveling along, this will be Jesus and his disciples, they entered a village, and a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. And she had a sister called Mary, who was also seated at the Lord's feet, and was listening to his word. But Martha was distracted with all her preparations, and she came up to him and said, Lord, do you not care? My sister has left me to do the serving by myself. Then tell her to help me. But the Lord answered her, Martha, Martha, you are worried and distracted by many things, but only one thing is necessary. For Mary has chosen the good part, which shall not be taken away from her. So we're going to look through the context of this passage before we then apply it to how we can live and what we can learn from it today, or how we can apply it to ourselves. Verse 38 to 39, Phil, you can just leave it up if that's easier for you. Now, as we were traveling along, he entered a village, and a woman called Martha welcomed him into her home. And she had a sister called Mary who was seated at the Lord's feet and was listening to his word. So what we need to note here is that Martha was the one welcoming Jesus. She opened her home to him. And what it actually means is when it says that she welcomed him, the translation is that she opened her home to Jesus. So while this was likely a meal and possibly overnight lodging for Jesus and the disciples, there's actually not much said on this. And so it isn't clear if this was definitely a meal. And so Neil and I had a debate. Should this passage even have been brought into our series? But there is debate on it within the commentators. The assumption is that this was a meal, but we might want to consider other options too, which we'll talk about later. Martha was likely the homeowner and the host, and we see that because she was the one who welcomed Jesus in. She was likely the older sister of the two. Mary is then later introduced. This is Mary who we encounter 3 times, and every time we encounter Mary, she's in the same position. She's at the feet of Jesus. Just now in Luke 10, she's at the feet of Jesus, listening to his word. In John 11, she fell at his feet and shared her woe when Lazarus had died. And then in John 12, she's the one pouring oil and perfume over his feet before his death and resurrection. It's quite powerful when you think about it. The 3 times that you encounter Mary, she's at the feet of Jesus, worshipping. Mary is actually already breaking all cultural norms. She is sitting at the feet of Jesus like a disciple would, learning. She was learning at the feet of Jesus. And if we have our first quote up, please, it says, this is from the book that I was telling about last time called Contagious Holiness. And he says, it is reasonable to infer from her, Mary's posture in this context, that Luke wants to depict her as a disciple learning from her rabbi, a role normally forbidden to women in Israel at that time. So this is Jesus yet again leveling the cultural playing fields, removing boundaries and making himself available to everyone. And if we have the next quote, it goes on to say in the same book, in fact, against the backdrop of the day, while falling short of proving that he would have interchanged all gender roles indiscriminately, Jesus' actions nevertheless remain counter-culturally affirming of women. Jesus implicitly eats in such a familiar fashion with both women, furthers the theme of his breaking down boundaries with supposed second-class citizens. And that's what I was talking on, remember, 2 weeks ago, about how Jesus was breaking down this cultural boundaries of these, the paradigm of honor and shame paradigms that were there, and how he was yet again having an egalitarian kind of position where everybody was equal. And he's doing that here again at this moment when Mary is sitting at his feet, and he's saying, you can be my disciple. The boundaries were clearly for breaking, as we can see. And then we go on to verse 40. Martha was distracted with all her preparations, and she came up to him and said, Lord, do you not care? My sister has left me to do the serving by myself. Then tell her to help me. But the Lord answered and said to her, Martha, Martha, you are worried and distracted by many things, but only one thing is necessary. For Mary has chosen the good part, which shall not be taken away from her. Now, the word distract, when it says Mary was distracted, it's the word, I'm going to get this wrong, perispeo. I'm sure Simon could tell me, perispeo, and it means to be pulled away, to have one's attention directed from one thing or to another, to be quite busy or overburdened. I think that has quite an apt meaning in today's society as well, to be distracted basically. Serving was Martha's distraction. Now, this is not necessarily serving in the role that we have all assumed, which was to host a meal or to have the hosting and the meal making, which I think, well, certainly I grew up with the assumption that the serving was in the kitchen, was the meal prepping. And in my research this week, there was a thought that was that actually the serving wasn't necessarily meal making. It doesn't change away from the point of the passage, but it is an interesting contextual point. It is thought that the serving actually which distracted her most was the involvement in Jesus' eschatological mission, in the mission of Jesus, and participating in the community of the disciples. And so what they're suggesting is that her serving wasn't actually prep making. It might have been ministry work, serving in a ministry sense, because the word diakonia is used for serving, and this word is used elsewhere in Scripture, and when it is used, it refers to leadership serving. It refers to ministerial serving of various sorts. And so it's that same word that's used for kind of ministry, leadership, responsibility is used here in this passage. Like I say, it doesn't actually change the message of what's being said today, but it is an interesting side thought. So we could spend time debating whether or not the scenario is a meal or not. It is definitely hosting and welcoming Jesus and disciples into the home. The one thing Mary was praised for is being with Jesus, spending time with him and being present. And so we actually have a lot that we can learn from this. I have two main points on the back of this passage. One is being present with God, and the second is being present with people. And these are two things that we can learn from this passage. Being present with God, being present with people. And so being present with God. For me, this scripture, like I said, was often taught in a way which treated Mary and Martha like personality types. You might relate to this, you might not. But I often heard things like, are you a Mary or a Martha? Or if somebody was doing something, they might say, oh, she's just such a Martha. She could certainly do like being more like a Mary. This isn't a comparison competition, nor is it Christian personality profiling. There is a lesson for us in this passage. Regardless if Martha was busy prepping dinner or prepping ministry, Jesus' point to her was she is too busy. She was too busy being distracted. The warning is not to be so engaged in ministry to then be distracted from the ministry's source. I know myself, I can be so distracted doing things for the Lord that I'm maybe not spending time with the Lord. And that is the main point, is to be in his presence. I meant to bring the book along with me this morning, and ironically, in my hurry to come along, I forgot the book called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. The irony. But it's a book called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, and it's by an author called John Mark Comer, and he's a pastor over in America, and he wrote this book, as it is what it's called, on the ruthless elimination of hurry and how to eliminate hurry from our lives and to live a less distracted life. He has a podcast, which is really good, but the book is fantastic, and I meant to bring it and show you it, but I'll maybe put a picture of it up later. But in it, I have some quotes from him, and if we have the first one up, and he quotes Dallas Willard. And Dallas Willard is quoted as saying, hurry is the great enemy of spiritual life in our day. You must ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life. And then he goes on to say, the next quote, John Mark Comer then goes on to say, could it be that Dallas Willard was right? That an overbusy, digitally distracted life of speed is the greatest threat to spiritual life that we face in the modern world. I can't help but wonder if Jesus would say to our entire generation what he said to Martha. You are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or indeed only one. The need of the hour is for a slowdown spirituality. What does it look like for us to prioritize God's presence without being caught up with all that needs to be done? How can I slow down in a busy world? It is far better for us to be with God than to do things for him. How do I do that? How do we do that? Martha had work to do. She did. Whether she was making a meal or not, she had people in her home. She had things that needed to be done. Maybe it was meal prepping, maybe it was hosting work, maybe it was ministerial work. It doesn't matter what she was busy with. The call that Jesus was saying to her was, it is better for you to be with me than to do things for me. I have a million things that I can be busy with. I am the person who sees the crummy kitchen counter, the washing needing to be hung out, the muddy floor, usually from my running shoes, to be fair, before Neil adds in. I am terrible, actually, for saying to the kids and to Neil and anybody else, I'll be there in a minute, I just need to sort. I'll be there in a moment, I just need to sort this here. And when it comes to my kids, I'm beginning to learn that the floor will wait and the crumbs are actually quite happy where they are for now, until they go to bed and it gets scrubbed out. While I spend time with my kids, being present, being a Minecraft mum, being present. Jesus would have been happy with a simple meal, spending it together. It is far better for us to be with God than to do things for him. Our busyness is an attack on our spirituality, and apparently this isn't just a modern issue. Martha had this issue too. How can we slow down spiritually? How can we slow down spiritually? If we have our next quote up, John Mark Comer also then goes on to say, Corrie ten Boom once said that if the devil can't make you sin, he'll make you busy. There's truth in that. Both sin and busyness have the exact same effect. They cut off your connection to God, to other people, and even to your own soul. And so my second point is being present with people. We have a rule in our household that says no phones at the table. When we have our dinner, our evening meal together, it's a no phones at the table rule. Now, Neil and I are the only two in our household that have phones, and so that means that we make sure that the phones, they're not even resting on the table, they are out of sight. Now, on the odd occasion, I may have my phone at the table, and might I add, it's usually to do something for my kids, booking them something. We're yelled at, no phones at the table! The protests come out, no phones at the table! And our kids know this rule, and the reason the rule is there is to protect family time, so that we can chat and engage with one another after our busy days, to be present together. I could tell you all the facts and figures about how our use of technology is directly related to anxiety and depression. The statistics of loneliness despite being more digitally connected than ever. But we know all these facts because Neil has shared them with us before. Busyness and distraction is a pandemic of today. Technology might not have been an issue in Jesus' day, but we can see that busyness was. And his answer is the same to us today as it was then. Slow down and be present. So I want to ask yourself these questions, and it's only you listening to yourself, so be as honest as you're able. How present are you with people? Do you really listen to what people say to you? Are you already thinking of the next thing to say? Do you use tasks to avoid being with people and engaging deeply with them? I think if we answer honestly, we would answer yes to some degree to these questions. I know I certainly can say yes to a certain degree to these questions. But Jesus was more preoccupied with the spiritual nutrition than the physical meal. Being with the people was more important to him. And so we need to ask ourselves, how are we being present in our relationship with God? How are we being present in our relationships with one another? There might be some things that you want to change in your life to steady the pace. I was recently given a stovetop kettle, and it sits on top of our stove, and I have to put the gas on to heat it up, and it whistles when it's reached a temperature. And it takes so much longer than my electric kettle that I had. But I love it. I absolutely love it. And the reason that I love this kettle isn't because it matches perfectly with my kitchen. It does. It's because it reminds me to slow down. Because I am terrible for filling up the kettle, flicking the switch on, and running off to see how many things I can get done in the 2 minutes it takes for the kettle to boil. Now, notoriously, I then forget, and I go back 15 minutes later and go, I really wanted a cup of tea, and I flip the kettle on again, I go off and I do some things. Well, good hours pass, and I've still not had my cup of tea. And what this kettle does is it reminds me to slow down. Because it screams at me. It hits that, the kettles that I mean, and it goes, wee, and it screams until somebody comes and turns the gas off. It makes me stay near it until it's ready. And it's such a simple thing, but I now go, if I'm having a cup of tea, I'm putting the kettle on, and I'm staying near the kettle now, and it reminds me to slow down. I do recommend the John Mark Comer book, and it's called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. He has some great strategies on how to slow your pace of life down and be present, how to be present in your relationships, and how to be present with God. He has some great strategies about creating what he calls a Sabbath day, which is a 24-hour period in the week where he does nothing. He doesn't have his phone, and his diary is clear. And Neil and I have adopted that in our weeks. We have a 24-hour period from a Friday night to a Saturday night, where if you can get into that 24-hour period, you're doing well, because we have that really tightly locked down as family time and as rest time. So I do recommend the book if you're interested. There might be some things in the relationships with people around you that are important to you that you might want to change to help you be more present. This might look like removing phones, creating focused time together, time boxing space and rest into your diaries. Like I said, Neil and I are militant with our diaries. It's taken us years to become like that, but we're really strict now with our diaries. Having COVID a few years ago, you'll remember I developed long COVID. I was really sick. I couldn't climb up the stairs. And it taught me so much about rest and exhaustion. And so I have to make sure now in my week I have allocated space, rest, and fun. Because that season of life taught me a lot about my capacity. And I've learned that if I have my needs met, that when I am then with people, I can be so much more present. When I come to people rested and having all my needs met already, I'm able to be so much more present with the people who are in front of me. And there might be things in your relationship with God that you want to change to help you become more present. Are you doing more for God than you are with God? It's an easy trap. It is an easy trap for us to do more for him than we are doing with him. Maybe you need to schedule time with God. Maybe you're the kind of person that needs to say, right, I need to schedule that into my diary every day at 10 o'clock or whatever your schedule looks like. But I would say make it accessible for you. Know what stage of life you're in and how you can make that accessible to you. So for me, I would love to spend an hour a day in a quiet room with a cup of coffee and a journal. That is not realistic for me in the stage of life that I'm in. So I need to make my time with God accessible for the stage of life that I'm in with kids. But this is about being present in His presence. How can we become better as individuals and a church at being present in His presence, removing the distractions and being present with Him? This series has been we've been encouraging us to invite people into our homes to table share. And as we think about Mary and Martha and their time with Jesus, how can we be fully present with the people who we invite into our homes? How can we be not distracted by what we do for them, but spend time with them? The people who we're reaching into our communities, the people who we're spending time with. Being with them, listening to them, and showing value. If Neil and the band want to come up, I'm just going to read this last quote if we have it up. And it's the same that John Mark Homer, it's the same one from earlier, but I felt like it was an important one to end on. Could it be that Dallas Willard was right? That an overbusy, digitally distracted life of speed is the greatest threat to spiritual life that we face in the modern world. I can't help but wonder if Jesus would say to our entire generation what He said to Martha. You are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or only one. The need of the hour is for a slow down spirituality. Let me pray and we'll go into worship. God, I thank You for Your word, and I thank You for Your reminder to us that being with You is so much better than doing things for You. God, I pray that You would help us to slow down spiritually. I pray that You would help us to engage more with Your presence and to engage more with one another. God, in a busy and distracted world, I pray that we would have space and peace to be in Your presence, to not be distracted and pulled, but to be with You. Thank You, Jesus. Amen.